we work in technology, and you would assume, therefore, that when we go from here, where we try and put our slides up and start talking through everything and running polls, that it all works very smoothly. But of course, Microsoft Teams isn't our technology, and it can do some interesting things. So we'll get through this kind of nerve-wracking bit at the start, and then hopefully we can crack on with the content. So I am now going to attempt to share my slides, so you can all give me a bit of a thumbs up, hopefully, once I've done that, or shout and say, yep, I can see that, that's right. Okay, can you see those slides?
Yeah, looks good to me.
Okay, brilliant. And now I'm going to switch my view so I can see some of my notes, and hopefully you can't. Done? Is that working, Jason?
Yeah, looks good still.
Brilliant. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. We can now get into what we came here to do. So welcome to our roundtable. Thank you very much for joining us. We spoke to Sarah about kind of what a roundtable should be, and whether it should be a very open discussion with very little content, or whether there should be more content and kind of less talking. And I think we sort of got to a point where it'd be nice to have a hybrid of both. So we've got some slides to go through, hopefully not too many, and hopefully not kind of taking up a big chunk of the meeting. So we're going to talk through some of the things that we've done and are doing in the area of kind of driving commercial value from higher education assets. But really, we don't particularly want it to be all about us talking through what we know and what we do and what we think, because that's not really the point. We're not the experts, and we're not living and breathing, working in higher education. We want it to be a bit of a stimulus for some points of view, some challenge, some perspectives from you guys who are kind of living this stuff day in, day out. So we're going to ask lots of questions, but ultimately we're here because we want to understand your views and perspectives on how you drive commercial value from your estate, what specific objectives you have to do this, if you have any, and how that has evolved and changed since we went through and emerged from COVID. So in terms of a bit of background, my name is Ross Cox, and as Sarah said, I founded a company called Dispace. We are a technology company, and we have a piece of cloud software for events management, which is called Switch. Now, whilst we sort of focus on a events and meetings management perspective, Switch has been built to be a little bit kind of resource agnostic, so something that you can kind of use to manage and hire out lots of different things, kind of regardless of what they are. Hence why we've got interested in the discussion about, you know, what else is there on campus, what other services are there that can be commercialized. The software is about increasing booking revenue and operational efficiency and delivering those services that you might hire out, whether they be space or facilities. We're not here to talk about that, but that's kind of a bit of a background on what we do and kind of why we are in this discussion, if you like. So to kickstart, I am going to hand over to an ex-colleague of mine. So Jason and I spent many, many years before we started doing some of this different stuff, working in financial services in credit risk, in looking at lending and recovery of kind of money that was lent out to consumers. So that was our background. So we have a kind of a reasonably well-trained commercial and financial mind from that before we kind of came into this world. But latterly, Jason spent a bunch of time doing consulting work on the property side of things, so bringing his commercial expertise into some property deals with a couple of examples of things that have involved higher education and building partnerships with commercial organisations in order to kind of create this virtuous result where both parties kind of really benefit from the outcome of that. So Jason's going to talk about those experiences in a little moment, and then beyond that, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of a project that we are kind of in the very early stages of, which is all about trying to create a single view of asset on campus and using that to identify what commercial opportunities exist as a consequence of understanding better what you have, what the market is for it, and crucially kind of what availability there is for hiring it out. So that's what I'm going to do, but I'm going to hand over to Jason now, and he can take you through a little bit of his background and experience. Just a reminder, interactive session. Please pop your hand up if you want to speak. Drop some notes in the comments. Sarah, my screen isn't brilliant for seeing what's going on with that stuff, so if you can kind of let me know if there's anything that comes up, we will pause and take people's questions. Okay, Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Ross. Good morning, all. Great to be with you this morning. As Ross has said, he's asked me to come along and talk about a couple of projects I've been involved in, and specifically those projects where industry and academic institutions have come together to collaborate to drive value. So that's the kind of core theme, I think, out of the slides this morning. I plan to take 10 minutes or so of your time to run through that. As Ross has said, the more interactive, the better. So please do dive in with any questions, thoughts or comments or additions as we go. Before I get stuck into that, important for me to be clear on a couple of points. Number one, I'm not here representing either of the projects I referenced today. So I'm here in a personal capacity. I'm not here representing Scalespace or PlusX. And more importantly, in relation to that, I'm not sharing any commercially confidential information. Everything I'm going to talk about today, everything's in the deck. It's in the public domain. It would be there for you to find should you choose to seek it out. Ross, if we can move on to the next slide. This just outlines the contents I'm going to run through. So broadly, I'm going to cover off a brief review of these two projects, but really then focus in on the conversation and the broader context that is applicable to them both. What are the common themes and drivers behind these projects? Because I believe there is some common themes there. I've listed questions at the end, but as we said, dive in as we go. The chat's open if you want to put them in there. Put your hand up, however works for you. Moving on to the next slide, please, Ross. So observations I'm going to share today are based largely on a couple of projects I've been involved with. The first of those is PlusX in Brighton. You'll see up on the slide there some details of how they position themselves. There's a nice picture of the building. This is a circa 50,000 square foot building in Brighton, adjacent to the University of Brighton campus, and positioned as an innovation hub, as you'll see, providing office space, specialist facilities, meeting spaces, event spaces, and supported with innovation programs and support programs being run out of that building as well. Key thing to call out here is the collaborating parties on this. So in this instance, there's four. The first being PlusX, who is the operator. The landlord, the owner of the building, is a large property company called U&I. University of Brighton are involved in providing support to deliver programs and innovation support. And there's also ERDF funding that's been secured again to help deliver those innovation programs and support within that building. So that's the first of the projects. And then if we move on to the next slide, it outlines the second of the projects I was involved with. So this is called Scalespace. There's a couple of these around the country, but the main one I call out here is the one in White City in London. 200,000 square feet of innovation space, again, they would describe it as. And again, there's some content up on the slides that you can read for yourselves there in terms of how they position themselves. This project was a collaboration between Scalespace, again, as the operator, so similar operator and entity to PlusX in the last project. Slightly different in this project, in that Imperial College plays multiple roles in this project. So they are the landlord, they are a tenant in the building, a member in the building, and they're also a major contributor to kind of broader community and activities that go on within that building. So you've got Scalespace as the operator, Imperial College as the landlord, but also as a member and contributor. And then the third party playing a role in this project is an organisation called Blenheim Chalcott, who position themselves as the UK's leading venture builder. So they're an organisation that invest in and support startup and scale up organisations and businesses, mostly focused in sort of fintech. So that's a quick overview of those projects. If there's not any particular questions on then, I'll move on now to talk about what I see as the kind of common objectives, themes, and principles that come out of these projects. So Ross, if you want to move to the next slide. Those two projects I referred to there are in some ways very different and in some ways very similar. So those projects are actually commercialized in very different ways, and they do have different emphasis and drivers. But they are very similar in their positions and what they're wanting to deliver. And crucially, both are fundamentally grounded in space. And what I mean by that, grounded in the provision of office space, the provision of specialist facilities. So in both of those buildings, there are workshops, there are labs, media studios, etc. And they provide event space and meeting space. And that event space and meeting space is for both, is for the use of both members and tenants within those buildings, but also for external parties, local community, etc., to use them. So as I say, kind of very different projects in some ways in terms of how they're commercialized and how they're ultimately being delivered, but both fundamentally delivering a very common proposition and delivering office space and facilities and events and meeting space. On the right-hand side is, again, some of the other common themes they talk about as well. So you'll see that they all talk about community, or both talk about community network and curated collaboration. They talk about expertise and bringing that expertise together under one roof. They talk about growth and innovation and social value and local impact. And they both talk about support services, innovation programs, etc. But I do split them out on this slide very deliberately, because on the items on the left-hand side are what I would describe as the commercial elements. They're the elements being delivered. They're the elements being commercialized. They're the elements delivering commercial return to all of the parties that are involved in the collaboration. I'll just pause there. I've covered quite a bit of ground in terms of those two projects. Any questions we wanted to cover off at that stage? And if there aren't any questions from the group, we've got a couple of polls that we would be interested in getting your input in. But anything from anybody there? No. In which case, Sarah, I think you are in control of polls, are you? So I think if you have a look at the meeting chat, if you open that up, the polls will be launched there, I believe.
Oh, I've put them all on. Yeah, there's one.
Yep. So the first one's come up there. That's great. Thank you, Sarah. So the first question I was interested in is, particularly as we look at the left-hand side of this slide, as to what extent you you guys on the call are already providing this type of facility. So the office space, the specialist facilities, and the event and meeting space. For what I've described here as non-academic users, I'm not sure whether that's quite the right terminology here, but hopefully that will be clear what I mean there. Yeah, and I was just interested. So the results are coming in there. Fairly even split right now. So yeah, look, thank you for that. I think that's nearly everybody that's responded there. That's very helpful. So I think everybody can probably see those results, but broadly kind of 40% of the group today saying that yes, often providing those types of services and facilities. I'm changing a little bit now. Must be fairly close to complete there. So yeah, so now we're saying, oh, where's that gone? Okay, so it's gone. So about 40% of the group saying yes, that has been delivered often. Half the group saying rarely is that the case, and kind of 11% saying never. So that's great. Thank you for that.
Do you want me to go with the next poll there?
Yes, please. So
Yeah.
there was a follow-up to this, which is interesting in the sense here of half of the group describing that rarely is that the case. I guess the follow-up question I was interested in is, do you think you have today assets at your disposal that have available capacity and that could maybe be deployed in this way?
Bear with me, it's just taken a moment to
That's okay.
open up.
This is a really mysterious experience for me because I can't see the polls or the results, or I can just see the slides. So it's just, yeah.
Yep.
Well, I'm hoping everybody else is seeing.
It's just ticking around. There you go.
Sure. Okay, that poll's up there now, Sarah. Yep. Thank you for that. Yeah, so there it is. Yes, no answer there. Again, just trying to get a sense of whether the group feels there's capacity to be exploited here in the way that we talk about. 11 responses so far, pretty 50-50, Ross, to keep you updated. Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. So I think, you know, so I think across those two polls, we're saying, just to recap, kind of 40% doing some of this today, 50% rarely doing it, 11% doing it never. And then in terms of the related question, is there available capacity in the existing assets? Then about 57% saying yes, there is, and 42% saying no, there isn't. So interesting result, and I guess probably fairly consistent with what we've seen previously, fairly consistent with what we would expect to be the case. Good. Ross, if you're happy to move on to the next slide, that'd be great. As I've said before, these projects do have a fairly common purpose between them, and they are anchored in space. And I make that point because without space, without that anchor of a location, of place, of however we want to describe that, then I think it's, my view would be, these projects would never have happened. But the other key piece I call out here is collaboration between industry and academic institutions, and that's been key. It's been key on both of these projects. Again, neither one party nor other, I don't feel could have made those projects happen, could have made those projects as successful as they have been. So that collaboration is absolutely key. And that does allow them to deliver a much greater impact collectively, impact on innovation, which both of these projects are very focused on, impact on supporting venture building, as I'd call it here. Other language you might use, kind of supporting startups, supporting scale-ups, supporting innovation, supporting entrepreneurism. And they both have significant local impact as well, both directly and indirectly. So a lot of common principles in those projects. But if you move on to the next slide, Ross, is they do talk about purpose, and that is important, and their impact is important, and they have very clear propositions that you've seen outlined. But these projects are fundamentally based in kind of and are fundamentally commercially driven. Their objective is to drive income from existing assets, and they are driving income from existing assets for the benefit and, I guess, economic sustainability of the economic institutions involved and the pursuits that those economic institutions have. And in doing that, there's a commercial partner that, in helping to deliver that and create that commercial success, in themselves get rewarded commercially. And in my view, the partner brings two key capabilities from what I've seen. They bring capabilities around helping to grow revenues, helping to drive income, attracting, retaining customers in the space. And the second thing they bring, the second key capability I think they bring, is they bring specialist operational knowledge. And by that, I mean how to deliver this specific type of proposition, deliver it well, deliver great member experience, deliver it efficiently, deliver it cost effectively, kind of balance all of those things out. I think they're the two key things that the partner brings. And what's crucial, I think, as well, is however these projects get commercialized, whatever their structures are, whatever their legal entities are, whatever the legal structures of those deals are, it's crucial to the success. And both of the projects I've described today, this is the case. It's crucial to the success that they're both commercially incentivized and aligned to that common outcome. And as I say, that for these two projects, it's very much about driving that, maximizing that net operating income from those assets. Again, just pause there in case there's any questions, thoughts, or additions from the group. No? Okay, so Ross, moving on again. Why do these projects exist? Again, for me, it comes back to the partnership. If the partnership wasn't delivering a complementary set of capability and assets, then the projects would not happen. Is my hypothesis, right? It very much is about partnership. It very much is about collaboration, and the partnership enables delivery of the world-class facilities, and whether that's being delivered for business, whether that's been delivered to students, whether that's been delivered to local community, it creates the opportunity for that happen that otherwise I don't think would occur. And again, it does that. The partnership does that in a way that creates commercial return for all of the parties involved. Last couple of slides I want to move on to, really just sharing a little bit of market context as I see it.
Jason, could I ask you a question? I'm going to put you slightly on the. I'll put you slightly on the spot. Obviously, these projects are kind of relatively large investments. They're kind of for purpose activities that are designed to create a facility that benefits the university from an academic perspective, gives students access to commerce and community, and of course ultimately creates an extra revenue line. Nothing's ever perfect though, so that's kind of the vision. To what extent would you say, recognizing that they're still relatively early on in their life, they have achieved success in terms of being a good source of commercial revenue, and at the same time kind of staying true to the kind of academic priority to provide a facility that's useful to on the teaching side?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think with both of those projects, that's a kind of ongoing debate point. It's an ongoing tension. It's an ongoing trade-off. That question of maximization of impact versus commercial return. So it's not a black and white answer. I think as you say, both of those projects are relatively new. I would say that right now, both of those projects are commercially performing ahead of plan. Particularly when you look back over the last couple of years and the impact we've seen of COVID. But no, I mean, it's a great point, and it's an ongoing, as I say, it's an ongoing strategy debate as to what extent, how far do you want to go in pushing commercial returns versus delivering the impact that was aimed to have. I think the thing that's interesting on Ross on that is it's a choice, right? It's, the parties involved, subject to some kind of baseline commercial viability, but beyond that, it's a choice that the participants in those projects and the partners in those projects can make, and in fact they can turn the dial up or down on those things at different times, as I think suits them in terms of different objectives, different economic cycles, different part of the life cycle of the project. Did that answer the question? Yeah,
I think that's the answer. Is there isn't an easy answer, is there? It's they're big investments. They are operating a bit of a balancing act between competing priorities, and sometimes you have to make some commercial sacrifices in order to kind of deliver academically, and it's just an interesting lead into some of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit later, so thank you.
Right. Okay, good. If we move on to the next slide, Ross, I've got a couple of high-level slides here on kind of market context. I referenced COVID a minute or two ago. We still talk about it, don't we, quite a lot. I put this up here because a report I saw the other day suggested there's a kind of distinct shift post-COVID, kind of back towards the office. I would describe it as kind of now describing that the average number of days in the office for businesses is around about 2.8 days per week. And so very much a move, in my view, very much a move to a kind of hybrid model, as I would call it. And I think that's coming about because employers particularly are viewing that having colleagues in a location in the office is important, and it's important for a few things. I think it's important for collaboration. I think it's important for culture, and I think it's important for communication. So I think for those reasons, there's a kind of shift back towards being present in a location, in a place, more often than we've maybe become used to in the height of COVID. At the same time, I think what we're also seeing in the market is nobody expects, I don't believe, a kind of a full move back to kind of pre-COVID occupancy levels, right? And I don't think anybody believes people are going to be back in the office 5 days a week. And so I think this creates a couple of interesting opportunities for people like yourselves that hold assets. I think they are kind of broadly, number one, you may well have today your own offices, your own space previously used by colleagues that is no longer fully utilized and could maybe redeployed for an alternative purpose. And the flip side of that is that what we're also seeing is there's organizations that are no longer grounded in a single location or building, and therefore demand for flexible space, flexible office space, flexible space to meet, flexible space to kind of get the team together, flexible space for doing collaboration is increasing. And I just, for me, there's an interesting market dynamic there of there are people who hold the space whose demands for that space are less than they've historically been, and there's a shift in the market that I would argue means demand for that space is now higher than it's historically been. And so there's an interesting shift there, I think, happening there in the market. And again, kind of, I'll open it up to the floor. I mean, I don't know to what extent people on the call here have seen COVID change both demand and behaviours for space in your own organisations, and whether you're seeing that, whether you're seeing less demand for certain types of space, are you seeing more demand for other types of space? Does that maybe create a commercial opportunity in that change that we've seen? Any thoughts on that from anybody? Any observations on that? Ross has put the second data point up, which is again an interesting one from WeWork, a large kind of flexible office operator. I'm sure many of you are familiar with. What's interesting in this one for me is I think it's grounded in those themes I've talked about previously, which is overcapacity in certain areas of the market in terms of office space, and a changing market in demand for flexible space. WeWork are trying to plug that gap. They're going out to landlords that got unutilized buildings, they're converting into their flexible workspace and then filling it up with people that are looking for that flexible office space, meeting room, collaboration space, etc. I think what's interesting about this one data point, and why I picked this one out, is that in this scenario, they're also collaborating with city leaders. Now, this is an American example, but actually I think this equally applies in the UK. And I suspect a number of you on the call are equally engaged with your city leaders, local authorities to some extent as well. And it's interesting because, of course, the city leaders are really quite desperate to try and reactivate cities. And so, there's a great deal of focus on this, and indeed often flexibility from them and support from them in trying to make that happen. They're trying to get people back into the city centres, revitalise those city centres, reactivate them for the benefit of business and commerce in those areas. So if we just move on to the final slide, Ross. So a bit of a summary from my point of view. then a final poll I think we've got. So from my point of view, you know, I'm seeing that there's economic pressures, I'm sure we're all seeing, that mean that we all need to be a little bit more creative in making the most of the assets we have. I think that the good news for you guys is in my view, I think you've got a rich asset base, buildings, equipment, facilities, knowledge, people. So I think you are ideally positioned to exploit those. And as I've said throughout the presentation this morning, I think in my view, collaboration is absolutely key to being able to exploit that opportunity. And I think the projects I've been involved in have demonstrated that with great success, actually. So Sarah, I think we've got a final poll, if you wouldn't.
Sorry, I think the last poll to drop in at the end of my stuff, Jace.
No worries, fine. So
sorry, I've just clicked on it. I'll close it out. Really sorry.
Sorry, that's my fault. Thank you everybody for your time. Quite happy now to open up to questions, take any questions, thoughts, comments from the group. Hopefully that was useful. Hopefully it was interesting. Hopefully it provided a little bit of food for thought. Any questions there? Anything on the chat?
Nothing through on the chat so far.
Okay.
Right, thanks, Jason. I will. I'll dive in because I want to make sure that we don't take longer after saying we weren't going to take very long. And I definitely talk for a long time, so I'm going to go fast. So part of the reason I wanted to get Jason involved was because he had been kind of heavily involved in those two big projects, which were kind of built for purpose, if you like, facilities that were designed from the outset to bring together higher education and the commercial world to create a space that kind of allowed businesses to hire meeting rooms, to use specialist facilities, and allowed kind of students to learn there and to rub shoulders with the commercial world, and hopefully to build some relationships and kind of form some pathways towards employment. So kind of big projects with big amounts of kind of cash sat behind them. One of the things that we've seen is as we've gone out and kind of sold our software, we've had lots of conversations about, well, here's our events and conferencing facility. Some of it is ring fenced for us. Some of it isn't, and actually we can't get access to it that regularly, particularly during term time. That's a bit of a frustration for us. We wish we had kind of more space to actively hire out and actively market. And actually, whilst we're in that conversation, we've got some really cool other things on campus that we know have got some commercial value. Some of it is kind of a broad appeal. Some of it is a bit more niche, but we know that there are people out there that want to hire it. And actually, to Jason's point, we also know since COVID that the way the occupancy of our space is going from day to day, whether it be teaching space or kind of office space for academic staff, has changed, and things aren't quite as necessarily as busy as they once were. And yet we know that there are a society of people out there that are now working remotely more often and might need a bit of ad hoc drop-in space that they can use. So how do we kind of leverage all of those things together? How do we make use of them? So this was born out of a conversation we had with a client who we went in to provide our piece of software to. They've got a small conferencing centre, and that was what we were originally talking about. But as COVID hit and we went through that process and everybody got a little bit more, even more emphasis around kind of revenue pressures, the dialogue started to shift slightly towards what else can we do to bring in revenue, and can we find a way to to commercialize some of the other stuff we have. So we spent a bunch of time going around campus and looking at things like television production studios, music production studios, textile areas, 3D printing, specialist fabrication areas, and all right down to kind of very specialist scientific equipment like telescopes or injury rehabilitation, all sorts of different things which I know you all have that are there designed to deliver a really good educational experience, but also have some appeal to the market. So we started getting into a discussion about how can we help make more of that stuff commercially, and that obviously identified what we kind of pulled together as 3 challenges in doing that. So number one, there just isn't any capacity really outside of what we use it for day to day academically. Once we allocate it for teaching purposes, we really don't have an awful lot of time. The second point was it's really difficult to manage competing demands for the space. So yes, we might have some spare capacity, but in reality, it's hard to understand when that capacity might be available for other reasons, because it's a bit of a moving feast and things evolve, and where something's taking place might change from day to day. So that just makes it really hard to do anything with it commercially. And then the last one, which is a kind of, if you do a very crude split of a higher education institute into kind of people that are interested in the business side and people that are interested in the academic side. And I know it's not that simplistic. Certainly on the academic side, there's like, well, we're not here to flog stuff to third parties. We're here to deliver a, exceptional set of facilities to our students so that we can provide a kind of world-class educational experience. So it's just not aligned with what we do today. So with the encouragement of the party that we were talking to, we started to try and dig into how we might address those challenges, how we might understand whether they can be overcome. So we went through kind of those one by one and have started looking at a project into how we do some of that. So I guess the first thing was, right, let's really understand this kind of this suite of stuff that you have and how it's used today. So we've started doing a kind of audit of what's on site in terms of space and facilities and how they're used, and to what extent that kind of capacity challenge is actually true. And as part of that, a little bit of an understanding of what the commercial appeal is for different things. So is there a market? Obviously, the space question is relatively straightforward. We know that through conferencing that if we have space that has a desk and some chairs in it and a overhead projector and other things like that, then people will be interested in hiring it for meetings and conferences. So the space is kind of relatively well understood in terms of what the market looks like for that and how you kind of turn that into commercial value. But for other things like the hiring out of equipment, and particularly as that becomes more niche, we wanted to understand a little bit more about what local market there was for those things. So there was a process in doing a bit of a job on understanding kind of how everything, what there was, when it was available, and kind of who might be interested in having those facilities and services for hire. And it's interesting when you get into this capacity challenge, because whilst it feels like there isn't any available capacity, very often you discover that actually most things are available during the evening, and most things are available during the weekend, and most things are available during the X number of weeks that students aren't around. And when you tot all of that up, you can get to a very crude view of actually what you have is about 50% spare capacity in lots of stuff. Once you take that out, and it's just about kind of managing it and trying to discover kind of how you can make that work for you. So the audit is an ongoing process to understand that. And then the second part of that is about kind of how you manage it. So One of the things that's come up kind of regularly is we've got a system that kind of manages the availability over here for timetabling, and we've got a system that manages it over here for conferencing, and we've got a system that manages it over here for facilities management, and they all have kind of calendars associated with them, and they all have bookings that go against them, but none of them really brilliantly talk to one another, and therefore there's always a level of manual intervention in the process, which makes it much more difficult to be able to make an assessment of what you can commercialize, what you might be able to sell, what's available to you at any point in time. So the second part of this project is looking at how we take modern software systems using APIs and start to bolt them together so that timetabling speaks to conferencing, and therefore there's this single view of availability of the asset, and you can start to understand patterns and trends in that availability and start to build some confidence around how and when you might be able to make it available to the public. And then the third piece of the jigsaw was how do we address this point about not losing sight of what we're here for, the kind of academic side of things. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is if we're going to offer certain facilities for hire, and that then requires some supervision because they are specialist by nature and we don't have enough people on the staff as it stands to cover that. To what extent can we help those young undergrads by letting them be the host, being the supervisor for when somebody comes in and uses a green screen, or somebody comes in and uses a photography studio, and they can host that. They get to share their knowledge. They get to rub shoulders with the sort of businesses that are interested in using those facilities, and there's an opportunity for them to earn some money at the same time. So we've been looking through that at the same time, and so the vision is we end up with kind of something slightly akin to this, where you are available to start promoting and offering services to market that you have on site, because you have an understanding of when they might be available. You have an understanding of who might want to buy them, so you can use all your kind of online marketing techniques to drive in the right sort of traffic, and you have the people within the university, the students, that are able to kind of host and support some of those things, and you can really start to bring this stuff to life. And the test here that we're kind of working towards is that we do that on a very small sample size to start with, where we've got some confidence and some understanding of kind of what capacity there is when it's available, and who we're going to get to provide that service, and take that out and take that out to market and test what we're doing. So we're still in a relatively young stage of this project, but I just wanted to introduce the principles behind it, because there's a lot of stuff out there that's kind of exciting that Jason talked about in terms of big projects that are built for purpose. But clearly, one of the challenges we have today is that we also want to get as much as we can from what we've got. And so what we are looking at here, and what we've been talking about now, is kind of how do we face some of the resistance, some of the challenges around doing that head on, and address those, and get to a place where we can deliver some of this stuff to what we know is some market demand for it. And this can obviously extend into some of the stuff that Jason was talking about, which is kind of flexible workspace and things like that can be offered to people on a temporary drop-in basis in certain parts of the estate. So yeah, that's a little overview of a project that we've been working on. Sarah, it'd be helpful if you would launch my final poll, please.
No problem.
And also narrate the answers to me.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. That poll should be live in the Q&A. It's taking a moment to upload. Oh, just try again. Bear with me one moment.
I think we're seeing it.
Sorry
Sarah.
about this. Can you see it?
Yeah, so I think I'm seeing a question, which is what's stopping you making more of your assets?
That's the one.
Commercially, We've got
Not a priority. We're already doing a great job. Little capacity beyond academic use, difficult to manage availability. That should be there for people to view. If there's any problems, just let me know.
yeah,
I'll relaunch it.
and there's a 10 or so responses in now, and it's a fairly 50-50 split between little capacity beyond academic use and difficult to manage availability. Actually, we've had a couple come in now. So yeah, about 40% on little capacity, 40% on difficult to manage, 10% on internal resistance. And that's
just creeping up now. Little capacities up to 50%.
Yeah.
53.
Yeah.
That definitely seems to be the main.
So 19 responses in there now, Ross, with 52% little capacity, 36% difficult to manage, 10% internal resistance.
So sorry, Jason, just relay those numbers to me again.
Yeah, little capacities about 50, difficult to manage availability about 40, and internal resistance 10%.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to note, we've just had pop into the meeting chat. Marianne has put in addition, delivering commercial business at the moment is a staffing resource.
Okay.
I should have said a staffing resource challenge.
Ask.
Yeah,
There was a
missed
word
that
missing
word.
off
Sorry.
the end.
Yes. Yeah, because although that I mean, the inquiries for commercial business, etc., is bonkers, but actually we're having to limit. We've already, for example, next year closed off any more inquiries or stopped taking business for certain weeks because we're already so slammed, and we know that we cannot. With our staffing levels at the moment, we won't be able to deliver it, and that's across catering and also the likes of housekeeping, etc. So we're really looking at how we are even doing housekeeping, how many times we're going to service a room, etc. And I mean, there's a lot that goes in with that as well, with sustainability and not washing towels every day and changing sheets every day. But it's actually a lack of resource as well to be able to facilitate that. So that is a challenge at the moment too.
And can I ask a question, Marianne, of you? So obviously slightly different example, but one of the things we've been talking about is, you know, if somebody wants to come in and use a green screen facility for 2 hours to record a marketing commercial, then, you know, getting an undergrad, a kind of 2 year 3 undergrad to come in and facilitate, supervise that is a good option. To what extent in kind of conferencing can you lean on students that are in hospitality and catering degrees to support you and bridge any of those gaps, knowing that obviously they have a degree to do? So it's a bit of a balancing act.
No, well, in St Andrews, we don't do hospitality and catering as a course. However, we do use a lot of students for our bank staff, our casual workers. So we do, you know, we go to the careers fairs, we go to the freshers fairs, we drum up. And throughout the year, like, so at the moment in ACE, accommodation, conference and events, we've got about 26 bank staff, so that's fine. During the summer, that's where it gets a wee bit more tricky, and we do get staff, and not always reliable, but we always find, but in the middle of August, that's it. They saved all their money for the summer. They're going off away on holiday for 2 weeks before the academic year starts again. So those last 2 weeks in August are a real challenge. And of course, that's the biggest time. It's quite busy for leisure. And it's when you're turning around the accommodation back for student use. So that's a bit of a challenge. So yes, we do, but we try to actively as well go out to the Scottish universities that do, like Napier, Elmwood, and colleges that are around about us that do hospitality and tourism, to try and bring them in for work experience. But again, that's at the hands of them, and the competition is massive.
Yeah,
that's the challenge. I mean, we've been having to use agency, and one, the agency staff we get are completely unreliable, or have no skill set. Two, we had an event, we had about 8 agency staff cancelled at the last minute because LNER countered with them with more money. So we went back, and then they came back to us, and then they went back again. So it's, I was at a conference last week, and there was a hotel up north, and their chef was leaving to go somewhere else, and they had to pay him £7,000 more to keep him. This is, and that's just so that's another challenge. You could have the space available, and to maximise it, but at the moment. But next year is bonkers. I think there's so much has rolled over, and I think people want to get back face to face. So you can have the space, but you might not be able to service it, which is just another challenge.
Interesting. And I'm conscious of time, but I'm going to ask two really quick questions. So one is, given the demand, is there, and given, to your point, money's talking, is there room, is there kind of price elasticity to increase your prices considerably and use that to help deal with the staffing challenge?
Not particularly, because I think with what we are, we're, we with Visit Scotland have our stars and what have you, and we are classed as campus accommodation. So there is only so much you can, in a price point, that we can sell our rooms, because we are what we are. We are student accommodation, and so it is. And we're competing with Dundee, which some of the nights are £40 B&B in hotels. It's only 20 minutes away. So we can't necessarily increase the prices. A lot of our business is repeat. Summer schools, so they're internals as well. So they all get upset about that, of course. So there's only, the answer is no, actually. We've had to increase our food costs because of inflation. I mean, that's just it is what it is. But to putting our prices up anymore, we'd actually probably prices out the market.
Okay, thank you. And then very quickly, my very last question is, obviously the highest scoring answer to the poll was little capacity beyond academic use, which is really interesting. Is that real? And so to what extent is that true versus it's just a land grab of space, and what actually gets utilized versus what is booked is not the same thing?
For us, for example, we've just had Younger Hall, which can hold 1,000, and it's a great venue, lecture theatre, where we do our graduation, etc. But it was supposed to be earmarked for 17 hours of teaching. It is now teaching from 8 till 6 every single day. And so the turnaround of that venue to do, I mean, it's a great space, but to turn it around physically, logistically, and to do for any event is a huge undertaking, and it's got to be ready back by Monday morning at 8 o'clock or the next day. So it's actually really, it's costing a lot of money, because you'd need to get janitors for overtime, etc., etc. So it's actually just, especially for student events, for example, it costs them £2,000 just to get the stage done and any chairs moved, never mind everything else. So it's so that type of thing. We just find that everything is from teaching. We have 2 rooms that we get all year round that we get to manage throughout the day, even during the teaching time. We've just got that back from COVID. We can't, the space is so limited just for teaching, and I think that's because numbers have gone up. It's just so.
Okay, that's really.
But then how much they're actually being used is what I'm trying to figure out, because this lecture theatre that can hold 1,000, you can sometimes go in there and there's 10 students in there being taught, and you're like,
Yeah, so I think that this is what we've been doing. So it's simplistic to walk in somewhere and go, what about this and what about this and what about this? You should just sell it all because it's there. And then you start to understand the nuance of all those things, right? It's not just about when someone's booked in there, it's about the change over time and what time of day that takes place, and therefore what the associated cost is. And so that's part of the audit element, is just really getting under the skin of the data and going, what is going on? When is it being used? Is it really being used versus booked? Is that the right space for the teaching, or have we got a 200 person room that's being used by 19 students 3 times a week? And it's just, and clearly there then becomes a lot of dialogue about what's right and wrong, and everybody has their own opinion on that. But yeah, that's kind of what we've been getting into with the project that we've been doing. So it's interesting to hear your take on that as well. I'm very conscious that we're now spilling over into past the hour. So I think I'll do if anybody's got any questions, then fire away. If not, we are available via Sarah. I am very happy, and I'm sure Jason will be, to talk a bit more at length about the things we've been involved in. We really appreciate you giving up an hour of your time to listen to us. That's really helpful. But yeah, any last questions before we depart?
Doesn't seem to be anything coming through on the chat at the moment. I just wanted to thank both Ross and Jason and everybody for attending today's call. Really interesting topic, and as Ross has said, I'm more than happy to share Ross and Jason's details following on from the call, along with a recording of today's session if you wanted to refer back to any of the elements from today. But thank you very much to everybody for attending today, and hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.